All right, so thank you for joining us today. So we're going to talk about integrating teaching, research, creative activity, and service through community engaged scholarship. And we have a couple of fabulous people here today to talk a little bit about this from their perspectives. And so we have Dr. Laura Gonzalez is with us, and she is the assessment coordinator and co-founder of One Journey Together. And she is I've known her as an associate professor in the School of Education at UNCG, and she's also been a research fellow with the Center for New North Carolinians. And also one of the cool things about Laura is that she's also been recognized across our state as a North Carolina Campus Compact faculty fellow for her work in terms of really integrating teaching and research through the communities that she's been working with. And she's going to be talking more about this work. Dr. Patti Clayton joins us from Cary. So she has been an independent consultant for over 20 years as a practitioner and scholar, and also has done an incredible work around education development and for faculty, students, staff, looking at service learning, community engagement, and experiential education. And she's been a senior scholar at UNCG and Institute for Community and Economic Engagement since 2010, I believe. And she serves also as a senior scholar with the Center for Service and Learning at IUPUI, and also as a Practitioner-Scholar-in-Residence with North Carolina Campus Engagement. So North Carolina Campus Compact is now North Carolina Campus Engagement, and you'll see that they both have had roles there. So community engagement, I am trotting this out every chance I get to talk about it as a strategic priority. You may have seen the Chancellor's Strategic Framework. It is one of the guiding documents that is recommended for faculty, staff, students to look at as we consider the future of UNCG and what it looks like as we go through academic program review, and as we look at the way in which we are addressing the transformations and changes that we have on our campus. And so the question before us is really, how can we weave community engagement through our roles to ensure high quality scholarship and partnerships? So I always like to have a definition of community engagement because there are lots of ways that people think about this. And so at UNCG, we think about it in the way that is defined by the Carnegie Foundation. So community engagement is a collaboration between higher education institutions like UNCG and our larger communities for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. The key things to understand about this is that, that there are certain keywords in here. Mutual benefit, meaning that the relationship we have with our community partners are win-win. For the academic side, it might be an opportunity for our students to learn in the ways that we have set out for them in our learning objectives. It might be for our own scholarship that we can deepen and understand something in ways that we couldn't without partners. The mutual benefit for community partners may be if they're an organization that we're helping to advance their mission or to provide services to that group or to service thought partners. Which brings me to reciprocity or reciprocal engagement. Reciprocity is often used synonymously with mutual benefit, but as you can see, there's in the definition by Carnegie, both these terms are in there, and so they wouldn't put in redundant terms, they would put in terms that are conceptually distinct. Reciprocal is really thinking about our colleagues in the community and students as thought partners and as co-collaborators, as co-laborers throughout the process, so that we are really transformed, our work is transformed by having worked together from the beginning through the end. And the last part is asset-based. And so that's not in this definition, but it's certainly been part of the conversations in the field, that this work is absolutely about working alongside communities to help understand how we can continue to leverage the assets that already exist there. And that we're not going into communities just to help them in the ways that we think that they need help, but that we are really working reciprocally at the beginning to understand what are the questions that they would like to address? What are the community identified priorities rather than the academic identified problems? This is a statement that is in the UNCG promotion and tenure guidelines. I love it. And I think most folks don't know about it because not a lot of people spend as much time as I do looking at promotion and tenure guidelines. But it defines scholarship incredibly inclusively, and it is such a helpful definition that I have seen people use in their statements of scholarly work or annual review or promotion and tenure. And it says that scholarship is characterized by creative intellectual work based on a high level of professional expertise, the significance of which can be validated by peers and which enhances the fulfillment of the university mission, or the mission of the university. And this is the part that's really important for me. Scholarship is not considered to be synonymous with research, but can be demonstrated by activities in teaching, research and creative activity, service, and directed professional activity. At UNCG in our promotion and tenure guidelines, we also, and in our practice and in our culture, we've talked about the teacher-scholar model, which is that the primary function of the university is teaching. Research and creative activity, service, and directed professionally, while important to the life of the university, do not have the central importance of teaching. And again, I think this is something that folks on campus are continuing to talk about. Are we a teacher-scholar model? What is the weight of that? How is that changing? And so what we're here to do today is really to recognize that we've been doing this work for a long time, and for over a decade, we've still encountered some of the challenges around having teaching, research, and service be structurally or practically distinct. That even though in our own work, and we'll hear from the scholars today sharing with us, that they're often integrated, or we can find ways to integrate them, that oftentimes in our narratives or our faculty assessments, we are asked about them separately, and it feels hard to really show that integration. And so I often do a lot of coaching with folks about how to write your narrative so that it's integrated. So as we think about teaching, research, and service, there's some considerations for integrating them, whether it's through community engagement or other strategies, is that there's practical and logistical considerations of how do I do this work, thinking about timelines, how long a project might extend for. There's partnership and relationship considerations of what is my partner wanting out of this relationship and how do they want to be involved. And then peer or regard. So how do my peers who are looking at my work and evaluating me or looking at my own esteem or eminence, understanding how this work is integrated. And so some of this, the 3 bucket problem, we have written about in this volume 2, way back in 2014, so almost a decade ago. And it persists, but I think we've got some folks who've got some strategies. So the last slide I have before I'll turn it over to Laura, if that's okay, is this idea of integration. And so research on the integration of research, teaching, and learning suggests, and service suggests, that faculty frequently are accomplishing multiple work roles simultaneously. Sometimes it is sort of incidentally or coincidentally, but the best cases are those who are really thinking strategically about how they can align their efforts so that as they're developing relationships and partnerships, perhaps for their students, they're also thinking, in a service learning course, they're also thinking about how this might inform some of the research that they're wanting to do by developing those relationships. What kinds of research questions or engagement activities can the students work on that would help them get a better understanding of the context or the issues that are being framed in the community that might be related to their work. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to ask Dr. Laura Gonzalez to share a little bit with us from her perspective of as a faculty member and someone who's mentored other people.
Thanks. It'll just take me a second here to get this set up. All right. I'm really pleased to be here. I was a faculty member at UNCG from 2009 till 2022. So it hasn't even been a year yet. At this time last year, I was still on campus, and I really honor those of you who are closing out the semester, whether that's as in a faculty role or a student role or staff. But it's just a pleasure to be here with you again. I'm now working on creating an LLC, One Journey Together, which is an educational consultancy group that is working to help provide quality educational and training resources to folks who are working with unaccompanied immigrant minors.
Hey, Laura, can I interrupt you real fast?
Yes.
I'm only seeing a loading screen for the slide you're trying to share.
Okay,
If you could tell it to stop screen share and then restart it.
Yep. Try that one more time. It says my screen sharing is paused.
There we go.
Is it working?
And I'm still only seeing that black screen.
Okay. Maybe
Go ahead and stop screen sharing. You can share that document with me and I'll be happy to share it for you.
glad to do that. This is what happens when you've been out of academia for a little while. You can't even share a screen anymore. Okay.
It happens to all of us. You're fine.
Okay. I just put the link to the Google Doc in the chat.
Still need that access. So I just sent back the prompt to you for approving me.
Okay. And that would be in my email.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You can go on to the second slide for me. And this is really just a reiteration of what Emily just said about the way how teaching, research, and service can often feel like three separate buckets or planters. And that I remember in my early days as an assistant professor feeling a little bit overwhelmed about being asked to attend to and grow something in each of these planters, and then also to maybe think about something in addition, like doing this with a community engaged lens. Made it feel kind of overwhelming to me. Like, I'm just trying to get something to grow here. I don't know if I can also do that and think about doing this in a community engaged way. But I think once somebody helped me, as Emily has helpfully shared, this idea of how to do this, how to grow them all in the same pot, and how to think about, with everything I do, I can sort of be watering and fertilizing all of these things at the same time. Then that makes it a little bit less cognitively overwhelming and easier to then think about. If I care about doing things in a community engaged way, it just becomes a way of thinking about it, and that I approach all of my work in that way. So we can go to the next slide. So a really important thing about working in a community engaged way is really thinking about those partnerships. And so I share this briefly just to say that over the course of my time working at UNCG, I was continually working on growing, developing, and expanding those networks. And that community engaged work is not something that happens overnight because of that you really need to attend to building these relationships. And I love the way Emily started us off, just thinking about the networks of relationships that we exist in. And so I won't really elaborate too much here because I want to be able to share an example on the later slides. But this is just to say that I started off just sort of identifying a few key people who were working in the sort of boundaries of the spaces where I wanted to work. And my research at the time was in encouraging educational access for youth from Latinx immigrant families. So for example, my connection with the Center for North Carolinians and Kathy Hinshaw was one of those key boundary spanners for me, who just helped to start to introduce me to folks outside of academia and in these kind of immigrant families and immigrant serving spaces. Because I was in the School of Education, connecting with some K through 12 leaders was also an important place for me to look for growing networks and partnerships. looking at bilingual service providers, so like Spanish-speaking pastors of churches, and then continually also relying on folks like Emily and Icy for these skill building opportunities. So knowing that my doctoral studies did not prepare me at all to do community partnering and think about networking in an effective way. And so I continually took advantage of these kinds of opportunities just to help me think more effectively about how can I do this. And then the final thing I want to say is that my early attempts at community engaged activity were early attempts. So they were kind of simple, they were kind of, bounded. And it wasn't until later in my work as a faculty member that I could do something more complicated and multi-layered. And I just want to say to everyone listening that to me, that is fine. Like, I think in anything we do as we're growing and learning, we start with the things we can manage, and those are maybe the simpler things. And then we learn how to do things in a more complex way. So my final research partnerships, which included PPP as Padres Promoviendo Preparación, which was a psychoeducational community-based Spanish language group for parents to help them become equipped to support educational access for their students, their children. And then SMP is So Much Potential, which is a resource bank for school staff to help them encourage educational progress, especially for families that have mixed immigration statuses. So like somebody may be undocumented, somebody may have DACA, somebody may be adjusting their status. And so I would be happy to talk offline with anyone who wants to know more about those projects. If working with immigrant families is something that speaks to you, I'm more than happy to talk about that. But for the purposes of this presentation, I think we can go to the next slide, Christy. So then I took a minute to think about, okay, so how did any of those community engaged partnerships or networks help me specifically with teaching? So I thought about things like some of my early efforts. When I had a course where I needed to have a practica, I would try to have the practica relate to like international students or immigrant students, immigrant families. So for example, the career counseling course that I taught, I asked the students to practice career counseling with international students just as a way to broaden their horizons of, what does it mean to do this with a population that's not like the ones we usually read about in our theory textbooks. Or inviting guests from community groups on special topics like college students with DACA. So asking folks who are comfortable to kind of share their perspectives or stories with my students. And so again, I think those were like early and smaller or less complex steps, but things that I could manage at the time. Gradually, it grew to include things like, if I was teaching a course where research and building research tools was a big part of the course, then making sure that I also talked about community engaged research as a viable way to do this. Again, this is often not in the textbooks, so it requires instructors to sort of find extra resources, go the extra steps to introduce this to students, because again, it wasn't part of my graduate training, but I wanted my students to have a better chance to kind of think about it early, adopt some tools, and be better situated to do this as they moved forward. I also tried to build community engaged activities into assignments for a variety of classes. So asking folks to interview people outside of the university space, asking them to do observations in community spaces, or to think about advocacy related projects that could be connected to the course topics. But the thing I want to talk about the most here is the most sort of complicated opportunity I had, which was to create an elective course from scratch. And so a new course that sort of revolved around service learning and was called Social Justice Advocacy in the Community. So if you can go to the next slide, Christy. Okay, this is a lot of words. This is probably the point where I should have weeded this down a little bit, but I was just trying to help convey everything I wanted to say to you all. So apologies for all the words. So when I was a faculty member in the counselor education department, there was a group of graduate students who approached me and they wanted to create a social justice research team. And so they asked me if I would just kind of be the faculty anchor, just to make that something that persisted within the department. And I said that I would. They were motivated by the fact that they felt like social justice was a topic that was not represented in their graduate training program to the extent they wanted it to be. And particularly that within counseling, advocacy is something that's talked about, but they felt like they weren't acquiring tools to do advocacy, especially with an eye to doing in a socially just way. And so that's kind of where the kernel of this idea started, is a group of students bringing their concerns forward. And then we talked more about what could we do to address this gap that they felt like was missing in their graduate training program. So we decided that we would together develop a course, and that we spent kind of, I would say, 6 to 8 months in the course development. And then the elective was taught over a summer session. So the only bad thing about that was that summer sessions are 5 weeks. And so to do something community engaged that involves partners in 5 weeks is pretty much impossible. But what we decided to do then, rather than trying to do something that might give someone the mistaken idea that you can do community engaged work within 5 weeks, we decided to be very clear that all we could do is really prepare them for kind of step one, which would be to do a strengths-based needs assessment, or a mapping of cultural assets for a community organization of interest. The course was taught by myself as the faculty member of record, and then 3 graduate students from the social justice research team who had really kind of emerged as leaders in the process were co-instructors with me. And so that was also important because we were modeling, we all came from kind of different spaces in terms of our gender identities, racial and ethnic identities, our citizenship and our languages. And so we also really intentionally wanted to kind of model our different points of view on the topic of social justice advocacy. The students who were enrolled also came from a variety of perspectives and departments, because we had taken the additional step of cross-listing the class. So it was not just within counselor education, but also with women, gender, and sexuality studies. And so that kind of opened up the scope a little bit more. We focused on teaching and thinking about advocacy skills, but we just used the example of immigrant communities because that was a space where I already had some partnerships existing that I could help to plug students into. The course, and I'll try to show you pieces of the syllabus here in a second, which is linked there at the bottom. But the course definitely leaned heavily into active listening as a way to be culturally humble as we approach partnerships in the community. And that also is kind of connected with counselor education, as active listening being a critical part of what counselors do as well. So we wanted students to sort of remember that we were not moving into these spaces with our expert hats on, but they were moving into these spaces with a learner hat on. And so, as you'll see in a minute in the syllabus, students completed service learning hours within the Center for New North Carolinians community centers. Students were able to create an advocacy plan for their own communities of interest, so they didn't have to share my passion for working with immigrant communities. They could also then pick their own community they wanted to develop a plan for. And then we did reflection across each week. So thinking continually about what were we learning about social justice, about advocacy, and about working in community engaged ways. There is a journal article that I'll provide a citation for, where we did research related to those student reflections. So again, that's kind of like the putting teaching, research, and service activities into the same pot. I will say this course was taught only once. It was a first draft. We learned a lot in the process. And so I'm happy to share it with you again, like not with my expert hat on, but with the hat of this was a space that I was in where I learned a lot. I don't know, Christy, I think I shared that with you as well. Perfect. Thank you so much. So you can scroll down a little bit. I'll try to do this really quickly. That course description piece, I just want to emphasize that we really tried to be very upfront with students about we need to examine the self before we can think about anything involving community engagement, social justice, or advocacy. We need to think in a nuanced and sensitive way about the community and how their needs may be similar to or different from our own, and what we can learn from them. And that we need to really be invested in this idea of praxis. So continually reflecting, acting, reflecting, and acting. We did pull from, because it was grew out of the counselor ed department. We pulled from some multicultural social justice counseling competencies from that discipline, but I would really invite you all to think about your own disciplines and, what competencies may be there in terms of working in community engaged ways or considering what it means to be in advocacy related relationships. So as you can see from the learning objectives, we really did ask people to spend a lot of time reflecting on themselves, deepening their understanding of power and oppression, thinking about intersecting aspects of our social identities, exploring the ways that advocates may choose to act for and or with groups, which is another thing that I've really heard Emily talk about, which has been really important for my growth. And so you can go down a little bit more, Christy. So some of the assignments included that reflection journal that I mentioned. You can keep going down. It included immersion experiences, so kind of the service learning piece. It included participation with working groups. So kind of being a member in spaces where refugees and or immigrants' rights folks were having their own conversation. And so not taking over that conversation, but being able to listen and learn and understand. And then creating that advocacy action plan. And I'll just say that the last part of this slide where it says we will represent ourselves ethically and respectfully in the community was so very important to the social justice research group that we really wanted to emphasize that to our students as well, to not be doing the parachuting into the community, taking for our own benefit, whether for teaching or research, and then jumping back out, that we really wanted them to understand that this 5-week example did not do justice to the kind of embedded relationship building that would be important to do. I think we won't have time to go through the weekly topics, but I'm happy to share this syllabus with anyone who would want to spend a little bit more time thinking about that. Okay, that might be the end of my time. I think there's one more slide here, which is just kind of final thoughts, but I can save that till the end if you want, or do you want me to just say those things real quick right now?
That's fine.
Okay. So just the encouragement to don't let great be the enemy of good. Don't think, I don't know how to develop something big, when there might be a chance that you do know how to develop something right-sized for you. And so start where you are and let yourself grow in this process. Just being very mindful to be conscientious about not doing damage or harm within community partnerships. I think the only way I've been able to do this, knowing that I'm a white woman who's married to a Latino and has grown in my bilingualism, but is still a white woman, that I needed to do this work in community with other scholars with identities different from my own, as well as in partnership with folks outside of academia. So always just remembering that in a group, we can correct our blind spots and learn together in a way that is much, much better for community engaged work. And just a reminder that part of our gift in academia is that we do have time to think, but part of our blind spot is that we sometimes think that we already know. And so just a reminder to, to bring those learning lenses with you at all times. And then I just provided here the citation for that article that emerged from the teaching of that course, and then the 2 websites for kind of current community engaged projects that I'm working with. And I will turn it over to Patti.
Laura, thank you very much for sharing that example. I was finding several points of connection between your story and some of the highlights of the story that I'll share. I really want to start by also appreciating Emily's relationship acknowledgement and would add to the categories, Emily, that you named, what Laura just said there at the end about the importance of doing this work in community with other scholars. Other practitioner scholars is the term I use. My story with service learning and community campus engagement is so incredibly co-created. If I wanted to offer, I think, 2 sort of watchwords for the comments, for the comments I'll share, but also for what I think is really at the heart of this work. One of those would be integration. that we've already talked about, integration across so many domains. And the other would be the preface co. Emily talked about co-laborers, co-collaborators. I frequently talk about being co-educators, co-learners, and co-generators of knowledge, co-inquirers. The idea of co-creation, I think, is such a powerful one for this work. And if we lean into it, as Laura gave us an example of the relationships that come from that, the processes that we develop together, the outcomes can just be truly extraordinary. So my own story with service learning and community engagement really is in many ways a story of integrating scholarship. Initially and particularly scholarship of teaching and learning, and I'll share an example of that in a moment. Also scholarship on partnerships, as well as scholarship done with community members. I've already used the term practitioner-scholar. That is how I self-define. Some of my, with a hyphen, practitioner-scholar. Some of my colleagues and I claim that identity as an alternative to being either practitioners or scholars. We see it as an integrated identity. We see it as an identity that anybody who's involved in this work can claim and can express, whether they're students, whether they're instructors, whether they are community members, whether they are staff. All of us can be practitioner scholars if we approach the work with a spirit of inquiry, if we draw on the knowledge and the work and the experiences of others, if we contribute what we're doing back out to others in a way that they can critique and build on, one of the key characteristics of scholarship. Any of us are potentially practitioner scholars. It's more of an orientation toward the work, I think. So a couple of examples, well, maybe three categories of examples of my work, and then I'll share some lessons or some key ideas like Laura did. The first is scholarship of teaching and learning, which is really where my journey with service learning and community engagement started. And it's been a thread that's been pulled through the whole, I'm thinking I should start saying 25 years, because it's actually been about 25 years. 1998 was when I first heard the term service learning, and pulled together a small group of students, staff, and instructors, and at NC State, which is where I was at the time. And we developed a very grassroots, making it up as we went along, service learning program that started with 2 courses. And right from the beginning, those 2 courses we approached as sites for scholarship. So as the scholarship of teaching and learning, we pulled from each course student reflection products. We understood way back at the beginning that critical reflection was the part of the process that generated the learning and gave evidence of the learning. So that's where we would look in our scholarship of teaching and learning project for evidence of learning. We developed rubrics, we applied rubrics to student products. We did that semester after semester, and we began sharing that at conferences, because there was a lot of hunger for how do we do critical reflection in a more intentional, more impactful way. And as we shared it at conferences, other campuses became excited about what we were doing and asked us to come and do workshops. And so students and myself and other instructors would do a little bit of consulting. Some of those campuses started doing their own scholarship of teaching and learning projects with our support. And so it became a multi-institutional scholarship of teaching and learning project. On campus, we took that work and we developed a minor that had service learning threaded through it, with the heart of that threading being the learning goals and the critical reflection process. And then the faculty who were developing that minor began sharing it at conferences. An article was written about it. And then still today, I consult in that area. I work with folks to generate new examples of critical reflection assignments, to generate new rubrics. So it's really been an ever sort of expanding and deepening scholarship of teaching and learning story that has been such a powerful professional development opportunity for me. When I think of how I was, who I was, and how I was as a teacher before I started down that SOTL journey, and what I have become as a facilitator of learning, so much growth has been achieved through that 20-year plus thread of scholarship integrated with teaching and learning. Secondly, I've had a similar, not quite as long, but a similar journey with what some might call scholarship of engagement. By that, I mean scholarship related to partnerships. So not grounded in teaching and learning only, or even mostly, but grounded in looking at the dynamics, the processes, the outcomes of partnerships. So I was part of a small group in 2009 that developed a new model, the SOFAR model for understanding partnerships, that developed a scale to be used across any of the types of relationships that model expressed, did a research project across 3 institutions using that scale, and published the scale in that research project. Worked with Emily and a couple of others who were doing a lot of work around partnerships to refine that scale into the second version of it. It's called the Trees 2 scale. And then folks around the country started using it, particularly a lot of doctoral students in their research. And so about 4 years ago now, I pulled together some folks who've been using it, and we worked to refine it further, published an article about it, developed it into a broader and deeper reflective process that now we've just finished a pilot study of. And we've submitted a grant to the Spencer Foundation to support a 3-year, very broadly interinstitutional project that we're hoping to be able to undertake. So there again, I think the part of the watchword is co-creation. So many people involved in the development and the refinement over time of scales, of reflection processes connected to those scales, and of research. The development of tools to use to reflect on partnerships on the ground level to help make our partnerships deeper, connected deeply with research into questions like, how do partnerships become transformational over time? And then the third example I'll share is closer to what Laura shared. I think it's more community, truly community engaged scholarship done, or practitioner scholarship done deeply in partnership with members of the broader community. Although I think if we consider students part of our community, then again, back to the very beginning, my practitioner scholarship has been engaged in that sense, because students were co-creators really from day one of the program and of the scholarship of teaching and learning that I just shared the thread of. But my own community engaged scholarship has really tapped my own personal passions. I was in an ecology program as a grad student. My master's was environmental policy. My doctorate was related to environmental ethics. And I had the opportunity to partner over several years with a group called the Wake Nature Preserves Partnership. It's a very interdisciplinary group of folks, faculty, staff, students, community members throughout Wake County, which is where I live, who continue to work on the processes of preservation of public lands and intentional management of public lands. And so one of the most exciting publications that I've been part of was a chapter that was invited from that group of probably about 10 folks, about half of those community members, about their process, about their growth as a partnership over time. And then right now I'm working with some organizations, some human service organizations and some animal service organizations here in my community to think about how those two sectors can be better integrated. And so we are both practicing that and we're approaching that as scholarship. We've done a couple of, well, 3 or 4 conference presentations, for example, in North Carolina and at national conferences. Throughout that story, what are some of the takeaways that I thought might be important to share with you? One has to do with the serious potential of being a peer reviewer, of being an editor. I had the opportunity at one point in that journey to edit a volume out of the Research on Service Learning series that came out of IUPUI. After having done a lot of peer review through the years. And I tell you, if you take seriously an opportunity to peer review or to be an editor, you can learn so much, not only about writing project management, but about the ideas of so many of the colleagues whose work you're interacting with. We did really deep interaction with the authors who contributed to volume 2 of that Research on Service Learning series. It's another incredible growth opportunity. So don't minimize the potential for your scholarship to be enacted through being an editor, being a peer reviewer for conferences, for journals. If you can wring everything you can out of that as a learning opportunity. Second, I think it's been so important to embrace the ways that my institutional homes have wanted to support this work. And so you all clearly have that opportunity at UNCG. When I led a center at NC State, one of the things I'm proudest of is that I was able to allocate significant chunk of the budget to a group of what we called community engaged scholars. And so we were regularly going to conferences. We were regularly finding publication opportunities within that people would pair up within this group and co-author chapters together. At IUPUI, where I've been a senior scholar for about 20 years, as Emily mentioned, they supported over many years a faculty learning community that was grounded in the critical reflection and assessment work that I had been part of. And we pulled together at one point a list of all the conferences and all the publications and all the development of new materials that we had been part of. And it was really extraordinary. And really all it took was an institution opening a space, providing a bit of support, a bit of funding, and naming it a thing to really wring a lot out of that possibility. Related to that, and third, I find the concept of a mentoring community. And Laura, I think some of your comments went in this direction. They're related to the course. Mentoring can be I can see mentoring as a hierarchical thing, but thinking of our co-creation with our student and staff and instructor and community colleagues as a mentoring community in which we all support each other's growth, support each other's learning, that orientation to co-creation across the full range of partners in this work has, I think, for me and mine, really been a part of what's made it such a important growth opportunity, and also so generative. I have probably around 80 publications throughout this 25-year journey, and one of them was single authored, the very first one I did. Since then, I don't even know how to write by myself anymore, and I don't want to. It seems beside the point to me in many ways, as instead of deeply approaching the generation of practitioner scholarship in a co-created way. And I guess the last thing I'll leave you on is thinking about scholarship, just like we want students to think about writing, scholarship as a vehicle for learning. And I think, Laura, this is the same place you ended, actually, that I think it's one of the themes of my story that just like with students, we don't want them to write only as an expression of learning they've already done. We want them to use writing as an ongoing learning process, whether we are preparing for conferences or developing new models or working on policy documents or writing articles. It is such a vehicle for our own ongoing learning if we orient ourselves to it that way. And I think that can be powerfully different than thinking I have to become an expert in something before I can write about it, or before I can step into relationship with others to inquire into it. Don't believe that. I believe that at any point we can step into a domain of inquiry if we think of it as a learning opportunity, as a mentoring community, as a co-created space, and we can have a lot of growth and a lot of impact. So I'll leave you with that. Emily, hand it back to you.
Thank you so much to both of you for doing this today and sharing more about your stories and what this looks like. We have just a couple minutes. Are there any thoughts folks want to share before we get off? I think what I appreciate about this is one of the things I've shared with folks is if it feels really hard to do this work and you can't figure it out, don't go it alone. Talk to somebody who's done it before. And so this idea of mentoring or talking to other folks, even to other students, the Office of Leadership and Civic Engagement has folks. Christina Gage is very experienced with service learning and community engagement. Christy Howell has experience here. She's our associate director in the Institute. And I certainly have a lot of experience coaching folks to think about how can they do this from a very practical. So one of the slides I had was that like, this can be very practical, right? Of like, how do I like save time and effort? Like, is there an online technology? Is there a scheduler? How do I, is there a template that I can use that I could give to my community partner that is explaining what's going on? I have questions about transportation and how students get there. So in the beginning, it can be very feel very logistical and heavy. And so some of the things that we are hoping that you will communicate with us at UNCG is that as you have these questions, just pick up the phone, call us, email us. Probably emailing is probably the fastest way to get in touch with us. And schedule a consult. It can be a just-in-time kind of thing, like, hey, I'm teaching class next week, and I realized I never thought about this particular thing. So a lot of this is very custom work because it's your pedagogy is your syllabus, your partnerships are all quite unique. But there are lots of ways that I have found to help make this work, both for remote students who are doing community engagement in other states, because in our department, we have a lot of students taking online programs, and then also working locally in our community. So with that, I just really want to thank you for joining us today, and please be in touch if you have any questions. And thank you so much to Patty and Laura for your time today, sharing with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.